There were some other important races last night besides the race for president. Massachusetts voters said no to a second slots parlor, no to expanding the charter school cap, yes to new restrictions on the confinement of farm animals, and yes to legalize recreational marijuana. The most contentious debates over the past few months, as you know, were on questions 2 and 4, the one on charters and marijuana. My next guest is the only one of the big three on Beacon Hill who sided with the public on both the big questions, but is the vote the last word? Senate President Stan Rosenberg joins me now. Good to see you, Mr. President.
Always a pleasure.
Just the fact that, I'm serious about that, you voted no on charter schools, yes
Correct.
on marijuana.
Correct.
Speaker of the House, the reverse on both. The governor, yes, a reverse on both, and campaigned vigorously, obviously, in charter. Does that cause any tension between the three of you?
Well, you know, we've learned to work together in spite of whatever differences we may have.
But, I mean, isn't there potential for that? These are really important issues.
These are very big issues, and I think there's probably a certain amount of rawness out in the land, because after all, they spent twice as much to pass the question on charters as those who wanted to kill it, and it went 2 to 1 against.
Well, it was obscene money on both. Do you accept any of the blame on this thing? I mean, my position, I know you tried, but the fact that the legislature couldn't fix these two issues.
Well, the Senate passed a bill. We spent 4 months. We put it together. The bill that we put together focuses on 100% of the kids. It also made it possible for some more charters. But the proponents wanted the 12, because that's what was on the ballot.
So is that where the blame lies? And, the unions weren't part of the blame here, the anti-charter people?
The Senate did its job. It went over to the House. It didn't move from there.
Okay, so the charter thing was defeated. About 2 months ago, Charlie Baker was on our radio show, and Marjorie Egan asked him a question. But what happens if this thing goes down? Here's what the governor had to say.
If the people of Massachusetts vote against this, they're making a statement about charter schools and about expansion, and that means we live with the status quo.
And what I should have said, what preceded that, is I was saying to the governor, he and I are both believers in direct democracy, and I basically said, if they speak, they're speaking on a larger issue, not just this narrow question. Mm-hmm. He said, yes. Is this the end of charter school expansion in Massachusetts?
We're going to have to refocus the conversation, because it's not over. Education Reform 1.0, which was done in the mid-'90s, worked. We have a great public school system. We still have a bunch of kids. The achievement gap's got to be dealt with. We need Education Reform 2.0. The Senate put some ideas on the table. I'm looking forward to the governor and the speakers.
So if I can translate that, what that means is there'll be nothing on charters alone. Charters might be part of a grander experiment.
You can expect people will file bills as a result of this, but we're focused on 100% of the kids. We need to get funding in there, and we need to move forward on the Foundation Review Commission recommendations.
You've voted yes on the marijuana thing, as did a slim majority of the public. I think Seth Moulton may have been the only high-profile, other than some city councils, high-profile elected official other than you who said they were voting for this thing. Interestingly, before it passed, when it was unclear, Bob DeLeo, your colleague, Speaker of the House, who opposed it, Karen Polito, the lieutenant governor, who opposed it, and you had some sort of press event or something in which you seem to be saying, if it passes, one thing we're going to need to do is raise the taxes. 3.75% on top of the 6.25% sales tax is not enough to cover the cost. Is that now going to happen?
We're pretty certain that that's not going to be enough to cover. It is the lowest tax in the country that's been adopted so far. We have to be able to pay for all of the costs associated with the licensing, the regulation, and enforcement. We also need money for public safety. We need for treatment and prevention of addiction. And in many of the other states so far, they've also raised money beyond that for other purposes. And so I'm open to having that conversation, too. But we've got to do the first two.
Well, you're not open. You're open to that part of the conversation. You're more than open. But the tax thing, the thing that really surprised me in the Globe story I read, I didn't actually see the press conference, is Governor Baker, who has been pretty strong on this no new tax thing, seemed totally open. Are you convinced he's going to go there, or what's the rationale for him?
When the Airbnb situation came up, and now with this, it seems to be that he's developing, as best I understand it, a concept that if it's a new product that should be taxed, he's open to doing that. He's not open at this time to raising other sorts of.
So that theoretically would not be a violation of his no new tax pledge.
That's what I think.
So you think that will happen? You think that will happen?
Well, if there's not enough money to pay for this, it has to happen.
Okay, so explain to me why the voters of the state who lived through, I thought, a total insult. They vote for medical marijuana, and then we had a call on the radio the other day from a guy in Worcester, I assume he's telling the truth, who has one of those licenses or cards has to travel an hour because Worcester County, even though it's mandated by law to have a dispensary,
Still doesn't have one.
He said still doesn't have one. This is a mere 4 years after the
Yeah.
people voted. Why should the voters assume there's not going to be another debacle, particularly in light of the fact that almost the whole infrastructure on Beacon Hill, other than you, opposed this question?
This is why these bills should be written in the legislature so that we can put together a realistic plan and execute it. If you look at what's happened with the Gaming Commission, it is the best gaming bill in the country, and everybody says that around the country, and it's being implemented exactly as the legislature laid it out.
So is this an attempt to assure the public this is not going to be another 4-year debacle?
We're going to work to get it up and running as swiftly as possible, but we need to be reasonable. These deadlines that they've got in this bill are extremely short.
Very quickly before you go, is it unfair of me to say that some of your colleagues were frankly cowardly on this marijuana thing, basically contorting themselves into pretzels to make an argument against it? I mean, the leader of it, Jason Lewis, who's been here a lot, a colleague who you appointed, acknowledged to me at the Kennedy Institute he could draft a bill for legalization that he would support. And I said, well, why didn't you do it? And I don't know what the answer was.
Yeah.
I mean,
the bills have been filed for years. It's been punted down the road, goes to the ballot, and all of a sudden people are saying, we can write a better bill.
Nice to see you. Be well. Senate President Stan Rosenberg.